-40 degrees, wind moving fast enough to tear the roof off a modern house, snow so thick you cannot see your own hand held out in front of your face. None of us, with all our down jackets, our central heating, our glowing phones, would last more than a couple of weeks out here. Most of us wouldn't last a couple of nights. And yet the people who lived on these frozen plains hundreds of years ago did not merely survive, they lived. Inside, beside a small fire, a child sleeps, wrapped in warm bison hide. A grandmother stitches a moccasin, the smell of stew drifts through the air, and all the while, just inches away through a wall of animal skin, the entire world is screaming in a fury of ice. How did they do it? This is not a story about human endurance pushed to its limit. This is a story about something far stranger, a piece of engineering so quietly genius that engineers today still study it. A design refined not over years, but over 100 generations. These people understood the laws of nature so deeply that they did something almost unthinkable. They turned the blizzard itself into an ally. Stay with me to the end, and you will understand why a shape so simple it looks almost primitive used the rage of the winter wind to heat the home, and what single hidden element turned a cone of sticks and skin into a climate control system more elegant than anything we build today. But before any of that, I have to tell you something that may change the way you look at your own house forever. What if I told you that a teepee is not a tent at all, but a living, breathing organism? We are used to thinking of a home as a static box, a sealed container that passively keeps the weather out. But the philosophy of the native peoples of the plains was the complete opposite. To them, a dwelling was not a wall against the world. It was a partner in it, something alive, something that listened to the wind, the snow, and the cold, and answered them. The teepee never fought the elements. It used their energy. Picture it. Openings placed with great care at the very top and the very bottom of the cone. Air moving constantly through them, drawn in low, pushed out high, exactly the way the air moves through your two lungs right now, as you breathe without even thinking about it. This was not an accident. This breathing fed oxygen to the fire and carried the smoke up and away. And here is the part that gave me chills the first time I understood it. The harder the wind blew outside, the deeper this breathing became. The fiercer the storm, the better the fire burned within. Think about what that means. The home did not resist the storm. It entered into a partnership with it. The poles were the skeleton. The hide covering was the skin. The fire at the center was the beating heart. 3 parts, one living thing, breathing in rhythm with the frozen world around it. We have spent the last century building houses that seal us away from nature, that hum and buzz and burn electricity to hold the outside world at bay. These people did something we have almost completely forgotten how to do. They didn't isolate themselves from nature. They cooperated with it. So here is a question worth sitting with as we go. Can a modern house, for all its technology, ever really be called alive the way a teepee was? Hold that thought. Because to understand how a structure this simple could survive a storm that would shred a modern building, we have to start with something that looks far too plain to matter: its shape. At first glance, a cone seems too primitive to be clever. A child could draw it. And yet hidden inside that simplicity is a near-perfect understanding of aerodynamics, physics these people never wrote down in equations, but understood in their hands and their bones. When hurricane-force wind came howling across the open plains, it did not slam into a flat wall. There was no flat wall to hit. Instead, the air slid smoothly up and around the sloping sides of the teepee from every direction at once. The pressure that would have flattened a square cabin simply flowed away across the curve. Any boxy structure would have caught that wind like a sail and fought it, and eventually lost. The cone refused the fight entirely. It let the wind pass over it, like water over a stone in a river. That same shape solved a second deadly problem: snow. On a flat roof, snow piles up by the ton until the whole structure groans and collapses. But the steep walls of the teepee gave Snow nothing to hold on to. It simply slid down and gathered at the base. And here is where their genius reveals itself again. That ring of fallen snow around the bottom of the teepee was not a problem to be cleared away. It became an extra layer of insulation, sealing the lowest part of the home against the knife-edge wind. So the more it snowed, the warmer the shelter became. The very thing sent to destroy them instead wrapped the home in a protective blanket. Remember this idea: a threat turned into an advantage, because you are going to watch it happen again and again before this is over. The frame itself was never rigid. Tied together at the top, the poles could flex slightly in a gust, absorb the force, and spring back. And most tipis were not perfect cones at all. They leaned gently backward, turning a steeper, stronger wall to face the prevailing wind, while the gentler front made room above the entrance and the fire.
But a perfect
Nothing
shape
here was
was only
decorative.
half the
Nothing
battle.
was accidental.
Because
Every
the real
angle was the
secret,
result of centuries of watching, failing, adjusting, and remembering. This was not architecture drawn by engineers. It was engineering written by the wind itself over hundreds of years into the memory of a people. The shape was the first secret. It kept the structure
Even when a
standing,
blizzard
a rock
raged
in the
outside,
middle of a raging
I will
ocean.
reveal the most
But a perfect
closely
shape
guarded
was
secret
only
of
half the
Native
battle,
American
because the
dwellings.
real secret, the one almost no one talks about, the one you will not find in any textbook, was hidden on the inside. Most people believe a teepee is just skins stretched over a frame, and that belief misses the single most important part of the entire system. Inside, attached to the poles at about the height of a standing person, ran a second wall, a wide band of treated hide or canvas that circled the entire interior, hanging down but never quite touching the floor, rising up but never quite reaching the peak. The Lakota called it the Ozan, and it was the closely guarded heart of the whole design. At first glance, you might mistake it for decoration, or a simple shield against dripping water. It was so much more than that. This single inner lining did the work of 3 modern technologies at once. First, it controlled the air. Cold air seeping under the outer cover did not reach the people. It was caught in the narrow gap between the 2 walls and pulled upward, rushing toward the peak. That rising current created a powerful draft that lifted the smoke straight up and out through the vents. This is why a family could sit around an open fire inside a sealed shelter in the middle of a blizzard and not choke. They had built a chimney into the very walls of their home. Second, it was an insulator. That thin pocket of trapped air between the 2 layers dramatically slowed the escape of heat, working on exactly the same principle as the double-glazed window in your house today. And the smooth inner surface reflected the fire's warmth back inward, so the people were heated not only by the flames in front of them, but by warmth bouncing toward them from every side. Third, it conquered moisture. In any cold shelter, the breath of the people inside condenses into water on the freezing walls. But here, that moisture gathered on the outer skin and trickled harmlessly down, while the inner world stayed dry. No damp, no frost on the inside, no slow, killing cold seeping into the bedding. Ventilation, insulation, heat reflection, humidity control, all of it solved by a single strip of hide that most history books don't even mention. Without the Ozan, life inside a teepee through a plains winter would have been impossible. With it, that life could be warm, dry, and almost unimaginably comfortable. And that brings us to the source of all that warmth, because what I am about to show you will change the way you think about a campfire forever. At the center of every teepee was the hearth, the source of heat, of light, of life itself. But it was not the big roaring bonfire we imagine. It was something far more disciplined. A carefully designed, carefully controlled system that obeyed its own rules. The fire was surprisingly small, a shallow pit, often no wider than half a meter. And that smallness was the point. A small fire ate far less fuel, and in a winter where every stick of wood was precious, that restraint was the difference between making it to spring and not. The wood was often stacked upright in a little standing cluster, so it burned evenly, made less smoke, and could be fed one piece at a time with perfect control. Placed dead center, the heat spread outward in every direction at once. No cold corners, no scorching hot side, just a balanced, even warmth filling the whole space. And above it all were the smoke flaps, 2 wings at the peak, each controlled by a long pole reaching all the way down to the ground. The people worked these flaps the way a sailor works the sails of a ship, constantly, instinctively, reading the wind. Open wide on a calm night. Draw nearly shut on the windward side when the hurricane came, a living dwelling, adjusting itself breath by breath to the mood of the sky. It is a beautiful image, a family tending their fire and their flaps through a long, dark night. But it raises an obvious and frightening question. What happens when the blizzard lasts for days and every branch for miles is buried under snow? How do you keep the heart of the home beating when there is nothing left to burn? The answer reveals just how far ahead these people were thinking. Winter on the plains was won or lost months before the first snow ever fell. Autumn was the season of gathering. Families collected every piece of dry wood they could find, favoring slow-burning hardwoods like willow and poplar that grew along the rivers and gave off long, steady heat. But here is the detail that shows true foresight, that wood was not left in a pile outside. It was carried in and stacked carefully in the gap between the outer cover and the inner lining, kept bone dry and always within arm's reach. That hidden store of fuel was a life insurance policy. When a storm sealed the camp in for days, a family could keep the fire alive without ever stepping into the killing cold. Complete self-sufficiency, built right into the walls. But trees were rare across the vast open plains, and so the most reliable fuel of all was something most of us would never think of: dried bison dung. On the plains, this was a kind of gold. Through summer and fall, it was the women who gathered and dried it, and once dried, it burned remarkably well, slow, nearly smokeless, giving off a strong and steady heat perfect for a teepee. Travelers of the era wrote that it actually outperformed firewood: less soot, fewer sparks. Nothing was ever wasted. The fire was never allowed to burn for no reason. At night, it was banked down to glowing coals that held their warmth until morning and could be coaxed back to life with the first light. To these people, fuel was not garbage, and it was not trivial. It was concentrated sunlight gathered from the earth, and they treated every piece of it with genuine respect. This is the quiet wisdom hiding under the whole story. Survival here was not luck, and it was not raw toughness. It was planning. It was a people who refused to let winter take them by surprise. But all the fuel in the world is useless if the wind can rip your home off the ground in the night. And the secret to keeping the teepee anchored was not in the poles at all. It was hidden beneath the earth. Even the most perfect wind-shedding shape is worthless if the whole structure simply blows away. And so these people developed an anchoring system that was simple and almost impossible to defeat. The bottom edge of the cover did not just rest on the ground. Loops ran all around its base, and through them wooden stakes were driven into the earth, angled, not straight down, which made them grip far harder and almost impossible to pull free. The cover was pulled tight and pressed flat to the ground, sealed all the way around, leaving the wind no gap to crawl under. And when the ground was frozen too hard for stakes, they simply ringed the base with heavy stones instead. Soft soil got stakes, hard ground got stone. Same principle, adapted to whatever the land offered. Never leave a single opening for the wind. But the most ingenious trick of all used the storm against itself one final time. The moment it began to snow, people went out and banked the snow high against the base of the teepee. That growing wall of snow was both an anchor and an insulator, sealing out every last draft. The harder the blizzard raged, the higher and stronger that wall of snow became. Snow the very symbol of death out on those plains, became a building material. It locked the home to the earth and made it utterly windproof. The threat, once again, transformed into the shield. Inside, the result was almost magical. The wind could scream, and the world could end just beyond the skin of the wall, and yet down on the floor, it was silent and still and calm. A child could sit and play in perfect peace at the center of an apocalypse. A flexible frame above to bend with the gusts. A sealed anchor below to hold against them. Perfect balance between strength and surrender. But a perfectly built shelter is still only an empty shell. What truly kept these people alive through the longest, darkest nights was something that no amount of engineering can build. The floor of a teepee was never bare earth. That would have been as unthinkable to them as sleeping on cold concrete is to us. The ground was layered first, with thick dry grass, trapping a cushion of air against the frozen soil, and then covered with heavy bison hides, fur side up, soft, warm, dry. You could lie directly on that floor and feel nothing of the cold below. Over the sleeping areas, more furs were piled into deep, warm beds, with bison robes so warm a person could sleep soundly even as the last coals died, wrapped in a cocoon of fur, sealed away from the dark. And around that fire, life simply went on. The space inside had an order to it. The place opposite the entrance was the seat of honor, kept for the head of the family, with everyone else arranged to either side. Winter was not a season of idleness, it was a season of making. Men mended weapons and shaped new arrows. Women worked hides, sewed clothing and moccasins, stitched them with patterns that carried meaning, tended the fire, prepared the food. The whole home hummed quietly with purpose, but the deepest warmth of all came after dark. The long winter evenings belonged to stories. The elders passed down the myths, the histories, the laws of the people to the young ones gathered close around the coals. These were not just entertainment. This was the school. This was how a people without writing carried 10,000 years of wisdom forward, voice to voice, heart to heart, winter after winter. Think about that for a moment. While the storm tried its hardest to scatter and freeze and destroy, the people inside drew closer and used those very same long, dark hours to weave the next generation tighter into the soul of their nation. The blizzard meant to break them. Instead, it gathered them around the fire and made them whole. This is the part the engineering can never explain. The hearth warmed their bodies, but the stories, the closeness, the shared work warmed something the cold could never reach. And that may be the truest survival secret of all. And yet, no single family, no matter how warm, could truly survive the plains alone. Teepees rarely stood by themselves. They gathered into great winter camps, set in valleys or groves, sheltered from the wind, near water and fuel, and they were arranged not at random, but in a wide circle. That circle was sacred, yes, but it was also shrewd. The outer dwellings broke the wind for the inner ones, and every entrance faced east to catch the first warmth of the morning sun and turn its back on the bitter north. And when the worst storms came, that circle behaved as one living body. If a family's fuel ran out, neighbors shared their own. No one was left alone with their hardship. The strong young men took on the duty of the whole camp, making sure no dwelling was buried, clearing the paths between the tippas. Strength was never in a single home. It was in the unbreakable bond between them, a great ship of many hearths, sailing together through the storm. Even their bodies were dressed for war against the cold. Layered hides, soft and waterproof, fur turned inward, with pockets of warm air trapped between each loose layer. Tall moccasins lined with grass and fur, mittens, hoods, the cold given no opening anywhere. And to fuel the inner fire of the body itself, they ate pemmican, dried bison meat pounded together with fat and berries, light, compact, needing no cooking, and able to keep a person going for hours. It could be stored for years and carried anywhere. The perfect food for the harshest place on the continent. The home, the clothing, the food, the community, not separate tricks, but a single seamless system of survival, every part holding up the others. So now we see it clearly. The survival of these people through the killing winters of the plains was never a miracle, and it was never luck. It was the fruit of deep knowledge and centuries of patient wisdom. The teepee was not a primitive tent. It was a complete climate system in which every single element, the wind-shedding cone, the breathing double wall, the controllable smoke flaps, the snow banked against the base, was thought through and given a purpose. An island of safety and warmth at the very center of an icy hell. But the most beautiful part is this: they did not conquer winter. They did not wage war on the cold. They studied it until they understood it, and then they lived in harmony with it, using the storm's own power to keep themselves warm. We live in an age that believes the answer to every hard problem is more technology, more power, more force. The story of the teepee whispers something we have nearly forgotten, that the most powerful solutions are often the simplest and most elegant ones. That true wealth is not measured in what you own, but in how deeply you understand the world you live in. These people had almost nothing, and they built one of the most intelligent shelters in human history out of sticks, skin, fire, and the patient wisdom of 100 generations. So I'll leave you with the question I asked at the very beginning. With all our walls and wires and humming machines, are our houses truly alive the way a teepee was alive? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep uncovering the lost wisdom of the ancient peoples who survived where we could not, subscribe, because the next secret is one almost no one remembers.